Today is September 17th. It is now 4:30. This is the meeting of the Water Quality Management Committee, and we've got a fairly full agenda, but I think we'll get through it. There's been a couple of suggestions to sort of rearrange a couple of things on the agenda, and I would entertain a motion from the board to take up item 5, our annual report, first. We need to get through the annual
So
report.
moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So the Water Quality Management Committee has made an annual report every year. It goes into the book that goes out at town meeting, the annual report in November. And in years past, the chair has assembled this sort of absent of any counter opinions or improvements. Tom Duncan graciously accepted the challenge to clean it up.
It was forced on me.
And I guess, Tom, I will start left to right. They're green and they're big. John, you had you had texted over a comment at one point, right? That you thought that we should have talked a little bit, we should have included something about the tax benefits.
I did.
Oh, you did? You did, I'm sorry.
No, you're off the
The champion
hook.
of that, I'm sorry.
You talked about it.
All right, we're going to start at this end over here. Okay, let's start over again. All right. Ed?
Okay, my one suggestion is that we include a sentence or two about the effort that's ongoing to revise the septic tax credit to a refundable from the current non-refundable. John and I think Steve Layton have put a lot of effort into that, and along with our local reps. So I think it's a significant one going forward that ought to be mentioned as an initiative that this committee had started.
I thought there was something in here along those lines.
It didn't mention
It
that.
didn't mention that
Something
specifically,
about
but that's a
state
good
stuff, but
point.
I think it's a very important one, because that can be game-changing for lower-income people that own a home, so.
You can
My
work
only-
that into the final draft, Tom?
Yeah, I'm going to figure out where we were as part of the permit planning, that first big paragraph. It was already kind of a monster, but that's, as I mentioned at the close of that paragraph, that's the focus of our efforts, is permit planning. So I'll put in that. That's a good point.
Yeah,
Ed.
the end of the second major paragraph has a sentence about that. It would be the logical place to put it.
Yeah, that's where I'm planning on putting it. Yeah, that's what I just said, where it talks about financial relief for property owners.
Steve, do you have any thoughts or comments?
I have several. I don't know if you want to hear all mine at once, or if you want to go by paragraph, so each person can comment.
Oh, let's get through your stuff, and then we'll see if there's anything else.
Okay. Maybe this would be too much detail for an annual report, but in the first major paragraph about watershed permit planning, it says the goal is to meet the mandated total maximum daily load by designating the minimum number of IA installations necessary based on residences' water use data and distance to a shoreline. That sounds like there's something really clever hidden in there that one can't figure out by reading it.
What?
I mean, it implies there's some clever scheme that somebody has in mind, but I've never heard it.
The clever scheme is to minimize the number of required IAs.
But based on residences' water use data and distance to a shoreline, like
Right.
there'd be some formula for deciding who has to put in IAs.
Well, there is. That's what we did. That's exact for each watershed. That's exactly what we did. That's how we prioritized the residences that were inside the circle.
I've never heard about that list. I mean, there's distance to the water body, but if it was dependent on water use, it would be a complicated, crazy, hard to predict map of residences that wouldn't be contiguous.
That's how all of the nitrogen loading is calculated. It's all based on the water use. So when you look at those big areas, you're incorporating for all those parcels. That's how all of the geo-boundaries were calculated.
Yes, but you picked a contiguous area, a reasonable shape, a blob, not a
Do you have a,
tree shape.
do you have a
Not a gerrymander.
do you have a recommended edit, Steve?
I'd have to, I could think about it and get it, I don't want to take up your time now.
Okay.
It just, this implies something else to me, and I just needed to be informed of. Now, I think I understand what you're getting at.
Do you want to just add a phrase, within the watershed? You know, so I understand what you're saying. It sounds almost like each individual house in the watershed has a different number, whereas
Yeah,
it's
if I'm below a certain level, I don't have to put an IA in, but
No,
my neighbor who
yeah.
has a big family does, and that's not what you mean, I think.
Yeah, so we're talking average water use and proximity to the estuary within the watershed.
You could strike everything after the word necessary.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Next
Yeah,
one, Steve.
or just, yes, okay. Does everybody else agree with that? With Steve's proposal, after the word necessary, you just strike it out.
Just the word necessary?
Goal is to
no,
meet the
everything
mandated.
after the word
and
necessary.
designating the minimum number of IA installations necessary, period.
Period.
Period. Well, that doesn't, there's no rationale there then. It's like we're just magically said, and I think the important thing was to say how we did it.
Well, how about based on the total water use?
It's not total water use. It's specific water use per household. It's very specific.
Average within the watershed, though.
Average over the
Maybe you
watershed.
want to
Well,
put
this
the-
is why I suggested doing it offline after the meeting. I mean, this could go on.
Right.
Go to-
But you understand what I'm objecting to. It sounds like you're picking and choosing individual houses.
We are.
Yeah,
But
That's exactly
like
what
next-
happened.
Next door neighbors?
Right, that's what's going to happen, is you might have to put in an IA and your next door neighbor 50 feet away doesn't have to, because he's only got, it's an elderly couple there living by themselves, and next door is a family with 4 siblings, and
No, that's not going to happen.
I've never
true at
heard
all.
that. That's never heard
that's
that.
base it on household water use, which is the source of Kristen's numbers, right?
Yeah.
That's to calculate the IA credit per household.
Right.
That's what that
Not to
average, it's
say,
an
if
average
you're using-
household number per watershed.
Right, it's not to say that if you're under a certain usage, you're exempt. That's never been included in any of that. It's, if you have a very small usage, you have a very large unit, whatever nitrogen is coming based on that water use is all incorporated into what that whole area would potentially get credit for.
so,
Right.
so this paragraph is intended to convey that we've been tackling the watershed planning issue. Perhaps Tom and Steve, some others saying factors considered include, okay? Water use, distance to shoreline.
Okay.
Are you okay with that, Steve, or do you want all the factors?
It's, I said, it's difficult to do it in this venue. How about the cumulative water use for the area or something like that?
The average.
It's just the average of
The
of the
average.
watershed, based on real water data.
Average makes it better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It eliminates the confusion of it being house by house. It's the average of all houses within that watershed.
I like that.
That's what it is.
Is that all right with you guys?
That's exactly how it's done.
Okay, we'll have to figure out the wording. Okay.
Okay, move on to the next one.
Yep.
A few lines down. Don't worry, they get further apart after a while. The substantial time and effort was devoted to consideration of subsidizing the costs, but the committee has not come to a satisfactory conclusion.
Right.
Are we giving up, or
I had it
can we
past
say
tense.
anything about what we're planning to do going forward?
How about come to a recommendation?
How about not yet come to a recommendation?
Not
Yeah,
yet.
this is a work in progress.
Well, it's definitely a work in progress. That's why I originally had it in past tense, and Kristen and I agreed that it sounded much better in present tense, indicating we're still working on it.
But I heard 2 votes for the word yet,
Yet it's fine.
3 votes, that does it. And then the next sentence, recommended that we pursue consideration and enactment of state legislation would allow our this is the thing that John is working on. But I'd like it to say that that's not a substitute for some subsidy from the town.
Oh, then I could just put in would also allow or provide, and then it
Okay.
makes it clear that we're considering separate municipal. Okay, I'll put also over here, would also allow.
Okay, then on next paragraph, the shellfish aquaculture, I think it would be appropriate to indicate somehow what % of the total solution this typically is. I mean, I don't want people thinking, oh, good, they've got shellfish. If that works perfectly, that's the end of our problems.
I don't
It's
think
my
anyone's
impression-
thinking that.
It's what, of the order of 5, 10%?
6%, I think, is the number
That was
that,
pretty close.
in the past, 6 to maybe 7%, in the single digits.
6, go with 6. Go
I
with
mean, you
6.
don't even have to use a number. I just
Right.
don't want
Go with 6.
it thought that if this works, none of the rest matters, which is hardly the case.
Well, no, that's why it's a small part of the total.
The number had been 7%. The number had been 7%.
7, yeah.
That's not the final number.
Go with 6.
7 was the draft number.
Go with 6.
Yeah.
Okay, the same for the permeable reactive barrier. Because I think that the general person or the select board member who reads this, it's useful for them to have a feel for what the total solution is. It's a little bit from shellfish, a little bit from PRBs, and a whole lot from IAs and sewers, and maybe some from urine diversion.
But mostly from sewering.
I don't mean that we have to have a percent. I'm just saying in
Right.
each paragraph where a particular it's organized by technologies. It just seemed to me it would be useful to indicate where it's possible, approximately what contribution we think that is.
Okay, one of the issues here, Steve, is I have to work with what was presented to the committee and in the committee. And if those numbers weren't presented in the past year, I can't sort of conjure them up.
I
and
don't
add
care
them.
if you don't use a number. I'm happy with words like small and little.
Right.
So we should put it for every one of these things, Steve, insignificant but fun.
Well, small,
That's,
but measurable.
Why not? They're insignificant, but they're fun.
I think you're pulling my leg. I mean,
No, I mean,
you
this-
tell the select
the
board
thing
that
is-
you're
the thing-
spending their time on fun.
We
but-
got a grant for Snug Harbor. It's taking care of some legacy nitrogen from the old treatment plant. It's not been quantified as to how much we're doing or whatever.
If you want to put that in, I won't object to it. I think it's hilarious. But I'm not insisting on it.
You're insisting upon some level of quantification.
Right.
So what words do you want to use for permeable reactive barriers? You want to say permeable,
small-
you want to say
a small
permeable,
additional
you want to say permeable
contribution.
reactive barriers are not a permanent long-term solution for eliminating nitrogen, but they have a very limited application in very specific locations where there's a high concentration of nitrogen, and the town continues to pursue opportunities in that
that's
area.
wonderful.
Okay.
Can I suggest that we form an ad hoc subcommittee of Steve Rafferty and myself. and
Oh, I
Chris
pass this to
Tiffany.
you, I pass this to you, I pass it to him
Wait,
next
no,
year.
on Friday, the three of us just sit down somewhere and talk through and add what we think needs to be added and be done with it, because this is just an annual report to the select board and to the town as a whole.
To the town.
But anyway, Steve, you wanted more quantification? Steve Layton?
Yeah, as I said, it doesn't even have to be numerical. I don't want to get into an argument of whether it's 6% or 7%.
Directionally.
But it's not 50%.
No.
And then, I don't feel strongly about this, but on the outfall, maybe it was a previous year, but I would think you'd say something about modeling has shown minimal effect on Vineyard Sound.
That happened after the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yep. I was very circumscribed with the dates that I used the input
So
for
this is a
this.
fiscal year,
Fair
it's a
enough.
fiscal year,
All right.
fiscal.
And then on the Little Pond, do you want to say something about the results?
If they weren't presented to the committee in
They
the
weren't
past year, I
present- they
can't
weren't presented
put
in the
them in the
fiscal year.
annual
Okay.
report. They're going to be presented today.
Fair enough. And on the Bournes Pond Inlet widening, anything about a future plan?
Again, none that we got within the fiscal year. We got a presentation and heard that they were re-permitted.
There's no decision about whether it's to be done or not.
I think it's to be done, but there's no timetable right now. They're still trying to get their permits.
And the last thing is, in the last paragraph, typo, you mean committee not committed, although some people may think that the committee needs to be committed.
Where is that?
Third line.
Third line at the end.
Add an E,
Oh,
last word.
yeah, that's a E for D. That, yeah.
That's it.
Sorry, I missed that one. I caught the fact that Ken Foreman's name was misspelled. I knew if he showed up here today, he'd be upset. All right, John Waterbury.
I'm set.
He's set. I'm set.
I'm good.
All right. So the three of us will talk briefly after this meeting and see about getting through this.
All right, sounds good.
Okay.
Second item, I'd like to take up item 3 as the second item, if on a Little Pond water quality, if I can get a motion to take up item 3 as item 2.
So moved.
Second. All right, all those in favor, signify by
Yes.
saying aye. Okay,
Kristen Rathjen, Science Wares. So because Ed keeps touting that Little Pond looks amazing, Steve asked me to look at the SMAS data and basically do an analysis. So that was what I did. I took all of the most recent years, did it station by station, just to present the trends for the data. It's pretty self-explanatory, starting at the Little Pond head station, so the furthest north station. We have the different time periods, so the data that was used to get the original TMDL number, so what was used for the MEP, the large slug of data that came after the MEP, and then in 2017, SMAS did an evaluation, so this was an average from a report that they gave, and I think it presents a good representation of what the conditions were relatively close to when the sewer implementation occurred. So looking at individual averages, you can see that there's a pretty strong trend that the nitrogen is declining, which means water quality is improving. I did remove outliers from the data analysis, so and there's a slide at the end if you wanted to know how I determined things were outliers. Moving down to Little Pond 1, not as strong of a decline, but still a declining trend in nitrogen. Sentinel station, so the station that people care about. Again, a strong downward trend in that data. Steve asked me to look at the projection of when you might meet the TMDL. So the red line is the target threshold concentration. So if decline continues on the same rate that it is, could expect potentially to reach the target threshold concentration 2028 at the earliest. There are a lot of factors that are influencing the rate of decline. As the legacy plume flushes out, you still have the regeneration in the benthic. So how that plays out in a couple years will help determine when you get there. And then I also included how variable the data is. So here is your standard deviation for all of the averages for the individual. You can see that for some of them, you're getting less variability in the data. So you're getting tighter averages. And then the last station, pond 3, so closer to the sound. Again, a decreasing trend, not as strong as further up in the watershed. And then if you take all of the data for the whole watershed, that's what it looks like. Again, a strong downward trend for nitrogen.
Thank you for putting this together, Kristen. You know, just as a little bit of a framework for all of this, way back a number of years ago, it was sort of like who could win the worst estuary award. And at the time it was determined that Little Pond was one of the worst, if not the worst. It's hard to measure what's worst in our world. But there was a very conscious decision to go after Little Pond, do what we thought needed to be done, and see if we could actually make things better. I think the data speaks for itself at this point, that it's better. I mean, Ed walks in here with his anecdotal stories about no smells, fewer algae mats, or no algae mats, fish and crabs. You know, I'm not going to declare a complete success because we've not made the Sentinel station, but we did say it would take some time. Clearly, the data from the groundwater along the peninsula says the nitrogen in the groundwater is significantly dropped. And, you know, if we're going to ask the town to step forward and spend, you know, millions upon millions of dollars to implement various things, whether they're aquaculture or urine diversion or sewers or IAs, it's difficult to ask people to step up to the economic plate if you can't point to something that we've tackled as sort of the, lack of a better word, the demonstration project in this town and be able to start pointing to some results. So thank you for putting this together. I was particularly impressed by how the difference in the sort of deviation, if you went back a few years, and how the deviation is tightening up, which tells us that things are much more consistent in Little Pond than in the past, where they're variable all over the place. Comments? Steve?
I think it was very wise of you to have Kristen do the data, and I think Kristen did a great job. And I was going to say, could you go back to this slide, but you already did. And I was going to say, it's too bad Ken isn't here. You know, he is.
That's why I came.
Just in time.
Yeah.
If I look at that, it looks to me, I'm thinking ahead now, and this isn't a criticism of this at all. If I eyeball those dots, it looks to me like we were conservative, and we're going to cross the red line and keep going for a little distance. And
We like to be conservative. We don't want to say it's 2026 and have people say you missed the date.
no, I'm not talking about the date. I'm glad you said that, clarify, in case that was, maybe I said it in a confusing way. It looks to me like after it crosses the red line, I'm not worried about exactly when it crosses it, that it will keep going even lower.
Yeah, it should.
But I would
plateau at
defer
some
to
point.
people like Ken to tell me, who's looked at the groundwater and a whole lot of other factors, and Kristen, to tell me if they agree with that that we've been conservative and there is actually more sewers than we need. And the relevance of that is, does it tell us how to adjust future sewer and IA plans?
About some of the installed base. Just going
Something to
forward.
think about.
At some point, the nitrogen that you've taken out is going to stop declining. So you still have load coming in from the upper watershed, you still have load coming in from fertilizers, from goose poop, from whatever. So you'll start to see that those dots level out at some point.
That's right.
But at this point, we don't know when that leveling out's gonna happen. There's nothing to say you're gonna get to the red line or below the red line. Maybe leveling out starts next year.
That's right.
Yeah, but keep in mind, these are numbers, this is a little bit of a sum game, mathematical game, and the real answer is going to be when we see healthier ecosystems, healthier biology, cleaner water in the actual estuaries. We have not yet seen the results of the most recent DEP flyover for eelgrass. When that's available, we'll see if eelgrass is starting to show up in the pond again. Ed?
I think it's great. One of the things that struck me just from the pure data standpoint is if you look at some of the beginning data, the higher numbers back in either the MEP or the 2005 to 14, and then look where we are now or last year for the latest data, everything's declined roughly a third or more. And I was kind of struck by how consistent that was from each of the sampling stations, that it's a good third or a little better. And I'll just repeat something I've said a number of times over the year, that, having been close to that pond for about 30 years now, to see the change. And I know, you can say it's anecdotal, but when people start swimming in a body of water that smelled like an open sewer 30 years ago, and was covered with mats of algae so it looked like it was wall-to-wall carpeting, and you see people actually swimming in it, kayaking, they're on those stand-up paddle boards, to see the blue crabs and horseshoe crabs and the little fish, and to see terns feeding on schools of little fish that didn't live in that water because they couldn't, and to see swans coming in by the dozens. I've counted as many as 3 dozen out there eating the eelgrass that now has grown. And I'd like to eliminate the swans, but that's nature. And, it's just a dramatic improvement. We don't have, unfortunately, some of the detailed data that would have been nice, like just simple clarity data before and after. But boy, when I can see the bottom of the pond several feet down that I couldn't see 10 years ago, something tells me we're doing a really good job. So I think the appearance, the smell, the clarity, the rehabilitation, I'll be shocked as hang if they don't show, boy, there's a lot more eelgrass growing. Is it real healthy? No, but man, is it better. So great data presentation, and it was very interesting, mathematically, how relatively consistent that third or better decline is.
Comments from this side of the board?
Kirsten, would it be useful to put an arrow where the majority of houses were actually hooked to the sewer? What the date of that is?
Well, but the groundwater travel time from where they all are differs.
It just seems to me that it'd be
The
useful.
last of the connections was made in 2020, but they started to be connected in 2017, 2018,
2016.
16?
The east, I think the
The west side?
west side started getting connected.
Well, if somebody just really liked grinding numbers, you could take a list of all the properties, the specific date it was put on, and the distance from there to the watershed, and
We've thought about that.
calculate what the answer is you expect. And it doesn't agree, you put it in the drawer. It does agree, you pull it out and say, look at this.
Ken, comments?
Well, I came in late, but this is interesting to see, and I think consistent with kind of the certainly the groundwater declines. I mean, we've seen, we're pretty much plateauing in terms of the levels of nitrogen in the groundwater from the wells. And it's not unexpected that there would be some lag and in terms of the response to the ecosystem.
Tom, John?
I think it's great. It's a nice look at things, and Kristen already sort of covered my thing that I would be surprised if the linearity demonstrated by the averages persisted. There's going to be a lot of things, I'm thinking, in large part of benthic regeneration, because there's loads of nitrogen in the sediments in that pond.
The more crabs, the better.
Yes,
That's always the bottom.
Absolutely.
keep it stirred up. John?
I think it's a great data set, and all I was going to add was that as we go forward with the sewing program to the next set of neighborhoods, and we start talking to people, I think we have to highlight both the quantifiable data, like what Kristen showed today, and the anecdotal information, because I think it's really important, because I hear a lot of anecdotal information on how bad things have gotten from the old timers, so it'd be nice for us to show a success case based on both sets of data, what we can actually measure and what we can visually observe. And I think it makes a more powerful case for requesting this large amount of money that we're going to be going forward requesting.
Yep. Comments from the audience? Okay, thank you. Very informative. Eric, are you on a timeline?
I'm good.
You're good. You on a timeline?
A little bit. I'll be quick.
I move Matt.
So moved.
So, item 4 will be next. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Hello, everybody.
Matt.
Nice to see some of you again. Good to be back here. So I don't know if this has been teed up or what, but this is to talk about an EPA-funded project that wrapped up a few years ago, $400,000 project on a permeable reactive barrier installed on the corner of 28 and Shorewood Drive over in East Falmouth, a pilot scale PRB, to see if this technology might be something the town was willing to pursue to help clean up nitrogen from our wastewater. And this committee approved, because we only had 2 or 3 years of funding to study the PRB and it was still going strong when the project ended, this committee approved some funding to keep up the monitoring of the PRB to see just how long it would go. It went in as a 2-year design life, and we're in 2020, and we're now 5 years into this, and so I can show you the data here to tell you the status of the PRB today. So this is a cartoon from the Cape Cod Commission of a Permeable Reactive Barrier. We had installed a series of wells, up gradient of the PRB and down gradient, for this limited town-funded study. Kristen, in collaboration with the Hui Nutrient Analytical Facility, analyzed 4 sampling depths per well, both up gradient and down gradient, twice a year for 2 years. And just to jump to the conclusion here, the permeable reactive barrier, which again was designed for a 2-year life, is still going strong as of June of 2025. So the PRB was put in July of 2020. This is showing you the nitrate plus nitrate concentration data for the control well in the blue bars, the first down gradient well in orange, and then the 50-foot down gradient well next to that. You can see that nitrate was high in all of the wells before the PRB went in June of 2020. And then even a month after it went in, we can see that it started to kick into gear. And by November of 2020, there's still lots of nitrate coming into the PRB, as shown from the control well data, but down gradient of the control well of the PRB, nitrate is near the detection limit. And you can see that in the 4 sampling periods that the town underwrote, the PRB continues to perform quite well. You might also be interested to see just the variability in the nitrate coming into this site here. And in the most recent sampling period, we hit the record value for that particular well of just over 14 milligrams per liter.
And it's not seasonal either.
It doesn't seem to be perfectly seasonal, no. So sort of conclusions here, greater than 99% nitrate removal nearly 5 years after post-installation. I just wanted to give you a quick update. Kristen has all of the data, but looking at all of the ancillary supporting indicators of sort of the health of the PRB, including looking for low dissolved oxygen, higher pH, negative redox, oxidation reduction potential. These are all of the indicators of the PRB continuing to perform as designed are supporting the nitrate data. The total organic carbon measurements, which are a measure of the emulsified vegetable oil that was injected into the ground as the fuel for the bacteria to sort of run this PRB, is starting to trend down, but there's still a lot of carbon there that suggests it should keep going strong for another 1 to 2 years, and sort of shrinking from the bottom of the PRB towards the center where the most of the carbon was injected. So obviously this is, something for the committee to discuss, and after I answer questions, I'll hit the road and you can debate this, but I might recommend, given the relatively small investment involved, to continue monitoring this PRB at the same rate every 6 months for a couple of years, this very limited set of parameters that Kristen was measuring. So with that, happy to take questions if you have any.
Thank you, Matt. Nice little summary. Comments from the board?
Question, could you go back to the
Yeah.
slide of the, I guess it's that one, yeah. Do you think that the variation in concentrations could be due to the amount of recharge? So it's been a very dry year, and maybe the concentrations are higher because there's less dilution from...
It's possible. We know that for this part of the PRB, most of the nitrate is coming from a relatively small number of homes sort of across the street from the from Shorewood location where the PRB was installed. So it could be a combination of that, and also we don't know how many of these houses are sort of year-round occupied versus seasonal. So it could be a combination of sort of rainfall recharge patterns, as you suggested, and maybe the occupancy of those houses.
Okay.
It's hard to say.
Second question I had was, from the DOC data, can you make any inferences about the rate at which it's being consumed?
Yeah, it's not perfectly linear like the last slide that Kristen was showing in her presentation. It tends to...
Cheater slide.
Yeah. But yeah, we might be able to do that, but it's not a nice gradual decline. It might be 120 milligrams per liter in one well during one period, and then 90 in another, but then we see it jump back up again a little bit. It's interesting, yeah. But in general, it is trending downward, especially at the deeper wells. But in the core of the PRB, it's still quite high, almost 100 milligrams per liter, and background total organic carbon is about 1 milligram per liter, just to give you a sense. And
Ed?
Couple of questions. I think it's great. I mean, it's exciting technology, and I'm glad that this committee, the town, and you yourself, Matt, pushed this and made it happen, and I guess, Ken, you were involved too. The control well is the same depth as the injected. So how deep is that, and where is it physically from the actual PRB? 20 feet away, 30, 50?
yes, so the control well that Kristen continued to sample is about 15 feet closer to the pond than the PRB. So it's 15 feet away from the PRB.
Okay, but along the same proximity to the pond, it's not behind the PRB, it's
Yeah, so the
adjacent to it.
groundwater flow, generally speaking, is flowing like in a sort of south-east direction, sort of coming across 28 and towards the head of Great Pond there. So the upgradient wells are 10 feet, I think, upgrading of the PRB. Then you have the PRB, and then the downgradient wells are a further 15 feet. And in terms of depth, this is 8 feet relative below mean sea level, and it's about 18 feet or so below the ground, if I remember. So there's about 10 feet to the water, to sea level at this location.
You know, it's kind of frightening almost, as the spike in June of this year with, holy mackerel, where's all this nitrogen coming from? And thank God we're intercepting it, but trying to figure out where that amount is flowing into that little inlet, or end of the pond, really. Can you re-inject into the same wells that were used? You can.
So the wells that they injected the vegetable oil through were not permanent. They basically take a giant hypodermic needle, drive it into the ground, inject the EVO, emulsified vegetable oil mixture, withdraw it, and then move on to the next location. But it's a relatively fast technique to do that sort of injection, that it doesn't make any sense to put in permanent injection wells. It would be more expensive to do that than to just come back every 5 or 10 years with that injection rate.
Last question, was there an analysis done of what is the soil conditions at that point? You know, is there some clay layer, is it gravelly, is it just pure sand? Was that done?
Yes, so we didn't do any formal soil analysis, just sort of a visual inspection. When we installed the monitoring wells, we were able to extract the soil from the site. And when you get down about 20 or 25 feet below sea level, you go from a relatively sandy, porous layer to a more fine-grained layer. And we see this, I've done a lot of work over in Wacoit Bay. You see that same layer over in Wacoit Bay, and presumably it's sort of a regional feature.
You see it in West Falmouth as well.
Yeah, so there's like faster moving groundwater in the upper 20 or so feet of the water table near the coast, and then slower moving groundwater below that.
Steve?
Thank you.
Ed asked this question, but I didn't understand the answer. Is the control upstream or off to the side perpendicular to the flow?
The PRB is here, the groundwater is moving perpendicular to the PRB, and so upgradient well, downgradient well, pond.
So the upgradient is what you call the control?
That's right, yes.
Oh, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
sorry. Yeah.
I thought you were saying something. And
That's the untreated before treatment.
I know you implied before that you wanted to be out of the room before we discussed, but the obvious question is, I mean, I'd love to see this monitored out to the point where it starts coming back,
Right.
because that also answers the nagging question, did something weird happen? Because if it lasted forever, it isn't because of this, or else you're really onto something.
Right.
You quit your day job. But how much would it cost for the 2 years that you're proposing?
I actually don't recall.
So
We had those numbers before.
I put in for a quote yesterday from the nutrient facility. The last sampling, the town authorized 6,500 for the 4 sampling events, and that was 2 years ago. So I will come back with an updated number that you guys can vote on at a future meeting.
It's short money and it's mostly lab costs.
Right.
Okay, John? Tom?
How, do you have any back of the envelope figure about what a reinjection of vegetable oil would cost, given present conditions? I know, hopefully we're thinking some years out, but what would it cost to duplicate what was done 5 years ago?
Right, so for this size of PRB,
Yeah,
120 foot long, so the contract with the engineering group and which included the emulsified vegetable oil was like 120K with some in-kind. I think they kicked in 60K of in-kind support. But that included, they did the monitoring well installation costs. They covered all of that for us. I don't have a breakout of that, but I would guess, it might be, 100K or something like that. And I don't know that it necessarily scales perfectly with the size of the PRB. In other words, if you wanted to do a 240-foot PRB, it wouldn't be double because they had to mobilize a crew from New
Right,
Jersey.
sure.
So there's the mobilization costs. And
Well, where I'm headed with this, because presumably with some idea of flow rates and the upstream concentrations, we can do a mass balance, right? And say so many kilograms of nitrogen was
That's what I was going to ask.
outgassed. So that would be the thing. It comes down to how much did it cost per kilogram of nitrogen?
Right.
So
And
I'd love to see those numbers pushed through and figured out, right?
we have those numbers. Kristen can get those to you. Unfortunately, I don't have them in the slide deck. The issue that we ran into with this site is that an EPA report that predated our study, if you remember, reported the groundwater flow rates at 2 to 3
Right,
feet
yeah.
per day. And then when we went to measure the groundwater flow rates, it was about a tenth
Yeah, I remember it was
of that
really
number.
small.
So the amount of nitrate removed was about a factor of 10 less than we thought
Yeah.
it would be. And so one of the things we learned from this study was, well, number one, do your own groundwater
Right, yes.
flow rate calculations before you go down this road. And two, Kristen and I worked with the USGS to get a working version of their model to sort of be able to readily estimate how many homes would be intercepted by a PRB in a particular location. So if the town ever were to want to do this in another location, because of this study, we're much better prepared to,
Yeah.
not the proverbial we, are much better prepared to decide if a particular location is the right place to do it in a sort of cost-effective way, to your point, in terms of like dollars per pound of nitrogen treated.
Yeah, thank you.
John?
Good job.
Yeah, thanks.
Just a different spin on Tom's question. It's kind of converting it to kilograms of nitrogen removed per single-family residence. So I can compare it to an IA or a sewer system and then do the cost comparisons to see what the economic efficiency of it is. But I guess once you put that hydrologic model in place, you'll be able to better understand how many homes are actually contributing to the downflow nitrogen accumulation that ultimately gets taken out by this type of system.
And if I remember, it's been a while since I looked at it, when Kristen and I worked on all of those back-of-the-envelope calculations, it worked out really well. Like the amount of nitrogen coming into this PRB relative to the number of homes we thought were contributing to the nitrogen at this location worked out to that typical kilogram, was it 4 kilograms per year per home number. It worked out pretty darn surprisingly well.
Right, we came at it from two different approaches.
Exactly.
Because I came at it from the USGS model and you came at it from the data. And we came up with it captured, I think, about 27 kilograms, which was 9 houses.
Yeah. So it was a disappointingly small number of homes that we were treating at this location, but the numbers worked out surprisingly well. And again, to the point where we now know if you wanted to do this somewhere else, start with the model, USGS model, and see if it's, you could even capture enough homes to make it economically viable.
Any comments from the audience? Step up to the microphone and identify yourself, sir.
Thank you. Ron Zweig from Precinct 1. I just have a question about where the samples were taken. Were they in the freshwater lens or were they below that? Or, yeah, I mean, it seems I can answer the question. I can guess what the answer is. But,
Yeah. All of the monitoring wells that we installed, even the ones that we looked at for the EPA, the larger EPA-funded study, were above the fresh salt interface. And so they were all within the freshwater, yeah. And these are, I forget at what depth we expect the freshwater interface to be at this, freshwater saltwater interface to be at this location, but these wells are well above it. Yeah.
Kristen, the report on all this, is this one of the things that's up on our website? Yeah. So if you go to if you look at the bottom of the agenda and there's a link to a page, Ron, you could go look up all the reports and the well data and everything, okay? Yeah, just let you know, it's there.
Yeah, the final report is from the EPA study, is very comprehensive. And then there's also since I last came before this committee, I'm sure Kristen mentioned it, there's a technical bulletin that talks about best practices for installing a PRB that's been released and is available online as well.
Thank you.
All set.
Good.
Just one other comment, if I could.
Okay, Colombo.
You've exceeded the years that you thought you'd have. The more years we have, the more nitrogen we're going to intercept, the more economical this becomes, right?
Yeah.
So that's just an important
Excellent
thing to
point.
keep in mind.
Yes, the pounds per dollar keep going down. Yes.
So
The
noted.
dollars per pound.
Dollars per pound, yes.
All right, in the interest of getting through this meeting by 6:30, I'm going to move on.
Okay,
Thank you
thanks,
so much.
everybody. See you.
Thank you, Matt.
I need to beg the committee's indulgence a little bit here. Next, I'm going to have John talk about his calculating total nitrogen household effluent. But before I put John up there, the Green Center reached out and asked if they would be able to have sort of a presentation about nitrogen and wastewater systems, sort of in companion with this. You would go first, and then they would go second, then we would comment on the whole block of things rather than parsing it out. So the first thing I need is a vote to take nitrogen household effluent out of order.
So moved?
Okay. Second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Second one is a vote of this committee to allow for the introduction of a presentation that is not on the agenda, but was put together sort of in response to the total nitrogen household effluent. All those in favor of allowing that presentation to go forward signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, so then we're good. So we're set up. So you go first, John, then Earl, are you going to be speaking? Okay, so you'll go second.
All right, so at the last water quality meeting, Steve Layton led, I thought, a really good discussion where we discussed how we could integrate urine diversion into our future watershed management plans, and he worked out two different scenarios. One scenario, the easy scenario, if the UD becomes our best available nitrogen reduction technology categorization, it's a no-brainer. It could be used by people in accordance with, what the IA usage would be allowed for in a watershed. Second scenario, a more complicated scenario, if the results are promising but not as good as an IA and wouldn't meet best available nitrogen reduction technology, how would we want to incorporate that into our watershed planning? And out of that discussion, there was a side discussion on the quantification of how much urine actually gets taken out during urine diversion. And we went around a little bit on some sort of numbers. So my talk today is basically, I'm showing a simple spreadsheet calculator model to do really a budgeting of all the nitrogen that comes into a household, typical household, and what would come out as effluent that would be released to either a sewer system or an IA system, or with one scenario, how much would be captured in a UD system where you had 100% capture of the urine. So that's what this discussion I'm going to lead today is. Where we go? Page down. Okay. So just some simple, definitions. When I do the budget for a typical household, I'll break it all up into two components. The black water, which simply put is all the human waste products that get flushed down the toilet, and then everything else, the gray water, the water that comes out of the sinks, the bath, shower, laundry. And for this analysis, I included dishwasher water and kitchen sink water. Some people put that in black water, but it's sort of the user's choice. And I went through and surveyed the scientific literature. I looked at values from around the globe. Of course, they're all over the place. It can vary by per capita income, all sorts of diet, more vegetarians, more carnivores, whatever. So I'm really looking at average numbers here. And so to test it, I've done a bunch of sensitivity calculations to look at, what if I varied one parameter and kept all the other variables constant, how would that change things? So another little housekeeping item is when I want to compare my calculations to the numbers in the literature, and more specifically the IA literature from companies like Clean2 Technology, who publish both water going into their system and water going out after it's treated in the denitrification chamber, I'm calling my water effluent, and that's equivalent to the influent that goes into an IA system. So I just want to make that clear because it can be confusing. And as I make the comparisons to a bunch of the data from the Nitro tool that's been used as an IA system on the Cape and Islands, just to avoid that confusion. So when I have a home, the wastewater is going to exit as water that goes right to the sewer or water to a septic system. So there's going to be no attenuation in the numbers that I'm showing today. It's just what is released, discharged by the household. So I had to do a fairly detailed literature search on things I've never really thought much about, like how much poop does a person make per day, what is the concentration in nitrogen of that excrement, the same thing for urine. And I just did broad survey numbers, and you can see that for the average fecal nitrogen contribution, it comes out to about 0.21 kilograms per year. And then for urine, because the urine is really in super high concentrations, I used an average of about 9,000 milligrams per liter per day, and you get about 9.88 kilograms per year of nitrogen that comes from just the urine that a typical household, and I used 2.27 people per household based on census data for Falmouth. So that's the starting point for the black water waste. And then for gray water, I did a similar literature survey, found some really good papers that talk about the total nitrogen that's coming out of bathrooms, laundry, kitchen, and then the mix of all the fluids together. And so I chose a starting value of about 10 milligrams per liter to use for my calculations to figure out how much the total mix of that black water and gray water is. And in addition, I looked at municipal water. Some of the records for Falmouth show about 0.5 ppm of total nitrogen in the water. So with those three components, I can do a mass balance calculation and determine, how much each is contributing and get a total mass of nitrogen being released, discharged into a sewer and IA system. And this is what I'll call my base case calculation. The assumptions are shown here. And what happens with the assumptions that I've used, you get 11.21 kilograms per year of nitrogen coming out of a typical household, and that effluent will have a concentration of 85 milligrams per liter. So I think last week, Steve, you asked, how do we convert and everything? So in this presentation, I'm going from the mass of nitrogen to a concentration. And you can see it's a fairly sizable number, and it shows that the urine is really the dominating factor. But I think it's important to show that we don't know all these numbers precisely. There's variation. So I did a series of sensitivity analysis, a bunch of deterministic calculations, where I varied one parameter and kept all the others constant. So you can see on the left is the base case, the 11 kilograms. And then I did a case where we use 90% of the water as opposed to the 70 that I did in my calculation, basically saying that 10% is lost to other things such as outdoor use or human consumption that's not released back as urine. And you can see that I still have a very high nitrogen per year of about 11.6. The concentration goes down a bit. I varied the gray water composition and concentration. And again, you can see that in pretty much most examples, left with a high effluent in terms of the kilograms of nitrogen per year. There are two examples where it's not quite the same. One of it would be where I just use a much lower concentration of nitrogen in the urine. In this case, I took the lowest level I saw in the broad survey I did, 4,000 ppm, and you can see that results in roughly half of the nitrogen mass. And then I did a calculation where I just assumed that all of the urine that is excreted by that household is captured in the tank and taken away. Now, we can all discuss that that's not a realistic calculation, but it's an end-member calculation. And what it shows is that you're left with an effluent that is really dominated now by your gray water, and that gray water is at 10 milligrams per liter composition. So you've lost a lot of nitrogen and you've lowered the concentration because the urine has been taken away. So what these simple calculations show that really urine is the dominating factor. The volume of water has some impact, but it's not dramatic in terms of the mass of nitrogen that's taken away per household per year. So I think this is important because we had this discussion at the last meeting of how much nitrogen are we removing. Well, we're going to be removing a fair bit of nitrogen, but this will require a few things, and we can talk about that in the conclusions. So how good is the number? And I wanted to ground truth it against values that are out there in the literature. And fortunately, there's a bunch of papers, recent papers, that show the Clean 2 technology, which is the nitro IA system. And it shows various households. Each of these sets of data here on the bottom is a distinct household. And the orange bars represent the influent. So again, their influent is my effluent. What's coming out of the house is going into the denitrification tank, right? So those orange bars represent the household nitrogen that's being discharged. And you can see that there's a couple of outliers, but my 85 milligrams per liter is pretty close. I think if you take away those outliers, the average is pretty close to my effluent composition. Now, I also show the 35 milligrams per liter because that's a number that was used in the MEP study. I believe that's a number used by the DEP. And you can see that as a household discharge number, that's pretty low compared to what most data is showing. There are some houses that are low and mimic that or are closer to that data, but on average, the 85 milligrams per liter turns out to be a more exacting number or closer to what household waste is looking like. And there's just a few more data sets that I show the same thing. The blue line represents my calculation, and you can see some of the in the orange boxes that we're getting much better agreement in most cases. Not all the time, but in most cases. So then finally, Steve Rafferty said, well, what does it mean in terms of if we look at something like Little Pond where we've quantified some of the load reduction? And I'll be honest, I really struggled with how to make that comparison. And the data that Ken has in that graph that shows what we talked about earlier, the loss in nitrogen load from the start of sewering to where we are today, and that's almost about 5,000 kilograms of nitrogen per year that's been lost. The MEP target load, I think, was about 5,006 kilograms per year, so that would say that we're pretty damn close to meeting the target. Now, how does my data fit into it? And this is where Kristen kind of had to educate me, because if we assume that 85 milligrams per liter is the effluent coming out, then you have to readjust what the MEP calculations are because they're using a much lower effluent. So when you do that, it turns out that the new target base case load would be almost 14,000 kilograms that would have to be removed, which in my world, where we have 11 kilograms per year coming out of a sewered house because it's capturing presumably all of the wastewater that's being discharged, it would take about 1,000, or with 1,000 homes being sewered in Little Pond, that would account for about 11,000 kilograms of nitrogen. So I'm still not sure how to use this data, whether it makes a huge difference or not. But I just wanted to follow through what the chairman asked me to do, and whether I did it the correct way. I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know.
no, it's useful.
So what are the implications? I've already said that, there's a big difference between the number that I'm calculating in my mass balance calculation relative to the DEP number. The number that I'm showing is probably closer to the reality of what's being discharged from the houses on the Cape. But I think we need to have a better understanding of the basis for the DEP numbers, and I don't really have a good basis for that. I have their table that shows it in the MEP, the Big Estuaries report, but it doesn't really provide the basis for it, how they calculate it or determine it from real data. Now, I don't even know how to handle it in terms of the TMDL and how we're going to handle it for, credits for IA systems or sewers, because, again, the DEP doesn't recognize this value. They use a much lower value. And then the last thing is, with respect to the UD pilot project, which I think is going to be really critical in providing the ground truth data, because they'll be measuring all these factors: how much urine is being captured, what's the concentration, how much nitrogen is being taken away in the tank, how much is going through into the septic system that remains. So it's going to be really critical. One thing I would say, though, is looking at my calculations, even with 100% UD, you end up with about 10 milligrams per liter of nitrogen that's going to be discharged from the house. And remember, that magic number for best available nitrogen-reducing technology is at or below 10 milligrams per liter. So we're getting close. But if you have 2 toilets in a house and one toilet is nitrogen or is a normal toilet, the other is UD, you're going to be above that 10 milligrams per liter, so you're not going to achieve best available nitrogen reduction technology. So what it tells me is that if we go beyond the pilot, or even in the pilot, it'd be really good to have some houses where all the toilets are converted to get a number that could replicate, I think, a best available number for what we could do with nitrogen going forward when we try to integrate that data into our watershed management plans and trying to figure out how we can get a credit for it. And in addition, it would also allow us potentially to get that credit that's out there, the Title V septic tax credit, which can reduce the expense of the plumbing installation by up to 60%. So there's a lot of incentive to really drive that number down as low as we can. So. And that's all I had today.
Yeah, I'm going to hold off all the comments till after we hear from Earl, but I do want to make one small point. The MEP model, anybody that's had time to look at the 35 versus the actual 85 that you're saying occurs, it's glaringly obvious. The one thing that nobody has factored in, and I don't know how you do this, is the further you are from the estuary, the more attenuation of the nitrogen in the ground is going to occur. So the fact that the DEP says 35 comes out and 35 makes it to the estuary, I don't know if it's the right number, but nobody's ever said if 85 comes out and you're 100 feet away or 600 feet away or 1,000 feet away, what makes it to the estuary. So that's one of these unknown variables in this whole rubric of where is nitrogen and where does it go. That I'm not even going to try to solve. But
No, and
for anybody that's listening or hearing that you got 85 over here and they're using 35 over here, how could that be that different? 85 over here isn't 85 when it gets to the estuary.
No, but if it's going into a sewer system, it's never getting into the ground.
Whatever,
There's no attenuation.
The 35 there.
35 that you're getting the credit for by a sewer, which is roughly 4.5 kilograms per year of nitrogen,
Yeah,
is
I agree.
underestimating how much the sewer takes away, because it's not attenuated.
This is why I threw that one question at you about what's really happening at Little Pond, because I think Little Pond is one of the best models we have for, okay, this 35 number versus what's happening and the biological growth that comes back. Is it matching up at all, or did we over sewer or did we under sewer? Earl, you're up. So 35, 85 stuff is nuts. Good job. And then 85.
So you can either do the arrows.
The loading isn't that different.
Thank you. Earl Barnhart, Green Center. I'd like to thank Jonathan for doing the work that he did. It is really good to know how much nitrogen is in wastewater. And Jonathan's report is based upon literature and averages and estimates. We're interested in how much nitrogen is actually in the wastewater and how to measure it and where to measure it. And we would like to review quickly the four different systems that people have on their homes and what is measurable, what is known, and what is not known. So this is the Title V septic system. It is based on estimates by MEP of 35 milligrams per liter coming out of the house. We know from actual measurements on the Vineyard and various West Falmouth that it's actually 85 milligrams per liter coming out of the house. When they do an analysis of this system, people remove their sludge from their septic system every few years. No one measures the nitrogen in that sludge. As far as we know, that's not included anywhere in the MEP model. They do not measure that. No one knows generally how much nitrogen is leaving the septic tank and going into the leach field. It's rarely measured. MassTech probably knows that number. But once it hits a leach field, some of it is denitrified into the air upward. No one knows that quantity. It's estimated at 25%. And the rest of the nitrogen goes down from the leach field into the ground, and it's possibly 75% of what came out of the septic tank. The second system that people are proposing to use extensively in Falmouth is the IA. And we call this a mini sewer in your backyard. It's essentially, it's the second container in this picture. It's essentially a little version of what happens in the sewer. And when the IA people design these and when the DEP analyzes and monitors them, what they look at is the concentration of the nitrogen in the water coming out of the IA. The concentration coming out has almost nothing to do with the amount of pounds of nitrogen coming out. If this person in this house uses twice as much water, the concentration goes way down. If they use less water, the concentration goes up. It doesn't tell you how many pounds of nitrogen this IA is removing. The only way you can find out the actual pounds coming out of it is to measure the concentration, which they routinely do, but you have to also measure the water that's coming out. And you multiply the two together, you get the pounds that's being removed by the IA. Once it comes out of the IA, it goes into the leach field. Some fraction of it goes up as denitrification into the air. Nobody knows whether if the concentration coming out is really low, if that 25% applies to that. It might only apply if it's high concentration of nitrogen. So that's like an unknown area. Mass DEP is going to study the amount of water coming out of a house for their pilot project, and they're going to do it by measuring the water that the house purchases from the town and putting water meters on the faucets leaving the house to irrigate the garden and wash the car, and subtract and try to figure out the amount of water that the house uses by using a bunch of meters and a bunch of calculations. We think it would be better if you would measure the volume that's of water going through the D-box and the concentration of the water going through the D-box, instead of trying to do it with water meters in the house. You get the exact accurate amount of water passing through the D-box, and it's much more direct and more accurate. The third system that people use to monitor the nitrogen is to send it to the sewer. And the sewer system has leaky pipes, and they keep getting worse and worse and worse over time. Amy Lowell says over time the leakage goes up and up. And the nitrogen going into the ground from the leaky pipes goes into the estuary. And we don't know if that's considered by the MEP model or not. But finally, when the wastewater goes into the sewer, some fraction of it goes up into the air as denitrification of gas. No one knows what that number is. It's not possible or easy to measure. Every day, the sludge is removed from the sewer and trucked off Cape to some remote place. They do not measure the nitrogen in the sludge. Amy Lowell says we are not required to measure the nitrogen in the sludge, and they don't have a number that they provide if they did measure it. What they do have, the only number that's measured and is known, is the effluent water coming out the bottom. DEP requires that the sewer measure that, and they put limits, upper limits on the amount of concentration and the amount of pounds. That's the only number that's known from the sewering system. The urine diverting house would look like this. In the house would be urine diverting fixtures that would divert the urine into a tank, which would be stored underground and pumped out by a service and taken away. And that service would measure the volume of the urine, they would measure the concentration of the urine, and they would get an actual, accurate number of pounds of nitrogen being exported from that watershed in the urine. A urine diverting house could have a urine diverting flush toilet, and that's now being developed and is soon to be produced by the American Standard Toilet Company. And they might have it as early as in the spring, and they might be able to show it on the Cape this fall. But if you had a urine diverting flush toilet in your house, the solid material, the feces from the house, would go into the existing septic tank with the gray water, and it would go through the D-box and into the leach field, and some up and some down. And if you measured the effluent from the septic tank in the D-box from a house with 100% urine diversion, our calculations show that the concentration of milligrams per liter would be roughly 8 to 9, which is less than the best IAs. And we hope that the Falmouth 2-year, 25-home pilot project to be done by MassTech will prove this. They are going to measure the water going through the house, they're going to measure the concentration in the effluent coming out of the septics, and they will be able to know for sure after their 2-year study what the true numbers are. So the best news from Jonathan's paper, as far as we're concerned, is we've been telling people publicly that urine contains 80% of the nitrogen from the wastewater. Jonathan's paper said it's 87%. On page 6 of the nitrogen of the wastewater, the nitrogen is in the urine from the wastewater. Also, we've been telling people that the urine is 1% of the volume, and Jonathan's paper said it's 0.8% of the volume. So it's much better than we had thought, and we're very happy with that. If you'd like to learn a lot more about urine diversion, there's going to be a summit in October and November by the Rich Earth Institute, and one of the sessions will be on the Cape in October, mid-October, in 2 days, 1 day at MassTech, where they'll discuss regulations about urine diversion, and 1 day at Green Center, where we will show actual urine diverting fixtures and hopefully the American Standard new flush toilet and other fixtures that are currently available. Thank you.
Thank you, Earl.
Hilda Menge, just want to include the dates. It's October 15 and 16. October 15, the summit will be at MassTech, and October 16, it will be at Green Center. And there's a registration. Go to Rich Earth Institute, and there's a registration form. And there is a cost associated, but it is pay as you can. So if it's too much, there's a way for everybody to participate.
Okay. I'm going to start the furthest away from John. Give you a chance if you want to comment on any of John's work or any of the Green Center's work.
Well, I guess the only comment I would make is that one of the reasons that the effluent concentrations are so much higher than the DEP estimates is they were based on higher water use. So I don't think the mass loading has changed,
Hasn't changed, right?
that much.
Yeah, that's another factor.
I think the concentration's gone up because we went to low-flow fixtures, and so the water use went down, but the mass of loading is the same. Your number of 2.7, I know that the MEP model uses a lower, 2.7 people per house. I know the MEP model used a much lower number, more like 1.8. They accounted for seasonality. I looked on the town website for water use, and they use a number of 2.3 people per household based on water use. And
2.27 is pretty close to 2.3.
so,
Yeah.
you know, there's those kinds of adjustments can account for a lot of discrepancies between models.
Well, I don't think it accounts for the mass, though. The kilograms per year, I've done sensitivities with different water, volumes, and it doesn't matter. It controls, to some extent, the concentration of nitrogen, but the mass that's coming out is still high in almost all scenarios, except for UD or using a low starting concentration of nitrogen in your urine. The water is not driving the mass of nitrogen.
Well, if you're multiplying the water times the concentration, you're getting a mass load.
You're just gonna, no, I don't think so. I think it's a small component of it. Because what's driving the nitrogen kilograms per year is the 1,000 liters of 9,000 ppm nitrogen, and that's not changing. You're changing the household input water, which I think the MEP study used, I think 151 gallons per day, and they took 0.9% of that as their number that they use for the starting water volume. So I was actually using, in my base case, a little bit lower water than the MEP calculation from the 2006 paper. I just reviewed that this morning. So, but again, I've done the sensitivity. It'll lower the concentration, the overall concentration, but the kilograms of nitrogen per year is dominated by the urine. It's just a high.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
The amount, but if your occupancy is 2.7 and it's really 1.8, the amount of urine produced is going to be substantially lower.
Well,
because then, there's
yeah.
fewer people peeing.
Well, it's 2.27 is, yeah. They use different numbers in the different papers you want. I just took the census.
I think that the amount of nitrogen per capita is pretty well pinned down. That's been, you guys have mentioned what it is. It's in the literature. There's other loading models that have used it. Per capita rates are solid, but assumptions about how many people there are and how much water they're using affect the concentration that's coming out. And obviously, if the per capita occupancy is lower, then the total load per household is lower.
Yeah, if you have less people, it'll drive it down.
I have a comment on that. I don't think that
Hold on.
concentration is,
The committee's talking.
Okay, sure.
Just, we'll jump back across.
That's it.
Okay, I'm going to ping back and forth. Tom?
I'm fine with all of this.
I think the key to this whole study is, what's the EEP's position going to be? We know what it is now, we know what it was, and that hasn't changed. What will it be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now as some of this additional information is accumulated? Right now, the modeling that Jonathan's done and a whole bunch of other folks is, somewhere in that 80, 85 kilograms. DEP uses a 35. I understand, but I haven't dug into the old reports, that is based on what Chairman Rafferty has said is they're factoring in the attenuation from, they're not looking at what is it at the house, they're looking at what is it at the watershed, so that is accounting for the attenuation. That's why they don't use 60, 70, or 85. They've factored in that, okay, what comes out of that house does not.
That's not correct. If you look at their table, it says their nitrogen wastewater is 35 milligrams per liter. It gets attenuated.
Yeah.
And it goes down. I'm not arguing that, but their starting input is much lower than my starting input. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. But, what will they do with mass balance calculations? Will they accept that and say, well, okay, that comes right off your TMDL? I don't think anyone knows. I'm sure they don't know. No. So it's a guess. So
does DEP say anything about volume flow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Title V has a flow number in it.
What was it? It used to be 200 and
110,
something.
110 per bedroom.
110 per gallons per day.
10 gallons per day per bedroom.
I mean,
Title V.
Ken was saying before that toilets have gotten more efficient in terms of water usage, which is of course true. So if it turned out that historically DEP is using some old number for toilet flow,
That's right.
than what we're using now, that explains most of it, right?
I think that's a big factor.
I did a 5-gallon flush and a 1.8 flush in my model. It just redistributes the water coming in.
Just-
And there's a little bit of dilution that would have occurred in the past, but it's not a dramatic impact, again, on the urine nitrogen. That is what's driving that kilograms per year.
For sure.
Yeah.
Right, but it changes the milligrams per liter.
In my calculation, it went from 85 to 81 by going to the low.
Oh, because of all the other water usage in the house.
Yeah, I see the work
I don't see
that John has done, is it helps to identify some of these parameters that we can all argue over how much water efficient is this or whatever. At some point, as we move forward in watershed planning, we've got to work with the tools and the rules that the DEP holds out there for projecting nitrogen reduction. It appears that urine diversion gets rid of a lot of nitrogen, and sewering gets rid of all of the nitrogen from urine diversion and a little more. IAs could do something else. To the extent that the predictive values in any of this stuff is not what's really happening, that will change the extent to which IAs or urine diversion is required as we go forward. So I keep standing around looking at Little Pond, which is, if you go back to, Kristen did a little bit of work when we were doing, the contingency plans. Her first pass at contingency planning for Little Pond said, using the rules that are out there, Kristen, if I misstate this, using the rules that are out there, there's a number of IAs upstream from where it's already sewered that is going to be necessary to make the Sentinel station values. But yet, the data we're looking at says we're likely to get to the Sentinel station without adding IAs in the upstream portion. So, this is the reality of models versus actually building areas and doing water quality monitoring beforehand, ongoing water quality monitoring in Great Bay or wherever, and discover, have we sewered enough and put enough IAs in, or do we need more sewers, more IAs, more urine diversion? Okay, but it helps to frame it, John. It helps to frame the scale of what we're looking at and the variability dependent upon what you want to choose. I think early, your presentation said there's no precise numbers. There's estimates, there's whatever, but nobody's measured everything precisely in there to have a true mass balance. Now, maybe somebody at Stony Brook has worked on that. I don't know. I'm going to let John Waterbury go.
Just building on what Steve said. Long Pond is a really good illustration. We, early on in the thought process of how we were going to deal with this monster problem. Little Pond. Was that if we worked south of Route 28, the MEP study said you've got to take out so many kilograms in Little Pond. And we said, okay, if we draw a sewer boundary around what we actually sewered, we'd get 80% of what the state said we had to take out. And it's looking like the data is saying that what they said we had to take out was very conservative, and that it looks like we can get to the TMDL by figuring that we're only going to sewer 80% of what they said we would have to do.
And the ultimate determining factor is, do we get eelgrass? Do we get do we get fish? Do we get crabs? Do people go swimming? Do we get the I don't think I want to go to one more meeting where somebody stands up and says, when I was a kid, I used to swim in, and my grandkids, I won't let them even like go fishing over there or go in a boat. I want to change that dialogue, and I want to change it as expeditiously as we can with as many tools that we can find that work effectively. That's where I'm at.
Right, so that's an important point, because the Sentinel station target was set by yet another model, which may or may
Is it the right
not
number? Is it too high?
be correct in terms of restoring full health to the
Do you have to
system.
get down to that nitrogen value or a lower nitrogen value?
Right.
There's a whole range of variables. All right, more comments on this, but I do want to We have one more presenter today, and I don't want to not hear from him.
Me or for the, I guess you're looking at me. I totally
I
agree.
saved the best for last.
I agree with what you, Steve, and John just said. Another way of expressing it is, and I think everybody else said, that Little Pond is in a way the bottom line. It's the final real, it's the first real field study where you can measure the effect of a substantial project on the actual estuary. And it looks, like we've been saying, that we were conservative, and that's great. So what we should focus on now is a few more years, we expect to hit that line. I can't think of anything that I would expect to be more compelling to DEP in terms of negotiating with them. Is there enough time to use that data, including what you said, not just the concentration in milligrams per liter, but the eelgrass and so on, to adjust our plans for the other estuaries to waste the minimum amount of money? Or do some of them, at least the first ones, also have to be done conservatively?
I would, at this moment in time, I would say we need to stay on a conservative path. We're being told to come up with a plan that gets monitored on a 5-year basis, and it's going to be a lot easier to trim down sewers in IA areas than expand sewer or IA areas out of a plan, okay?
But you're admitting that there could be trimming.
Oh, absolutely, that would be.
There's
that would-
time to do it.
How much aquaculture are we going to get? Okay? That's a lead in here. It's a lead into the aquaculture.
Well, actually, Earl, I think, is still waiting.
Earl's out there, and Maggie's up there, too. Oh, go ahead, Earl.
I had one more piece of data that's new. You said, what will DEP say about these future urine diversion systems? DEP says, well, we want the milligrams per liter coming out of these houses to be 10 or less. That's their bottom line, right? Best available nitrogen removing technology is 10 or less. Well, our personal house has composting toilets. We remove all human waste from the groundwater. And we've had Mastech come last week and measure the milligrams per liter in our D-box, and it was 8.8. So our milligrams per liter from our house is less than the best IAs now that are available. So we want to make the case to DEP, if we can do it at 8.8, we don't want to put in an IA. We don't have to put in an IA, and we would hope anyone who wanted to duplicate that would be allowed to do that.
Maggie had her hand up. Do you want to yield? You want to yield, Maggie?
Sure.
Okay.
Two things. So, and we have a very low water use, so we're going to measure all our water now too. So that will make the number even better, most likely. It will also mean that the gray water probably has less nitrogen than we thought. But about the nitrogen in the urine, it varies greatly. It varies between, can be double. If you eat literally, if you eat a lot of meat, an American guy or an Australian, which is even worse, it is twice as much as what I would excrete as a vegetarian. So it makes a huge difference, and we saw that in our pilot program too, in our pilot project. So it's not a constant at all. So that's why it's important to get the households numbers.
Maggie?
First of all, Maggie McGaw, Waquoit. First of all, I want to say thank you to Jonathan. That was a really interesting presentation, and Earl and Hilda as well. What this suggests to me is the importance of exploring gray water systems in conjunction with the UD pilot program. It seems to me that that's one of the obvious conclusions that you come to when you see that the UD takes out all but 10, and the gray water accounts for the balance. I mean, and there are gray water systems that are approved for use in many states. I think there's even some allowable gray water use in Massachusetts, and I just think that's something that this committee could explore aggressively over the next 2 years in conjunction with the UD project. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Everybody's been heard from. Eric's been very patient. We're now going to get an update on aquaculture expansion.
Eric Karplus from ScienceWares, and I'm speaking in the capacity of a contractor to the town on the aquaculture expansion. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of history on the project. I think a lot of the committee's familiar with it, but it helps to understand where we're at. Home sweet home, that's a nice aerial view of Falmouth that's been used in some of the early presentations that this committee has put forth. And it turns out that there's been trouble brewing. And back when the Y2K bug was all the buzz, people didn't really talk much about the fact that there was a nutrient issue. And finally, the Clean Water Act got interpreted to include diffuse sources as a part of the problem and tasked the towns with identifying all the estuaries that were impaired and how to address dealing with that. And as you all know, there are over a dozen of them in Falmouth. And so back in January of 2014, there was a certificate issued to the town of Falmouth, and it acknowledged that, as we see at the bottom here, both traditional and innovative technologies would be explored in rectifying this situation. And as people started considering what some of those alternatives might be, one of the things that was put forth was oysters as a way to solve the nutrient problem. And as early as 2014, the town of Falmouth undertook a pilot project in West Falmouth Harbor, deployed a oyster reef up there. There's remnants of that still in place. And that was exploring this idea that, and I don't know, some people may have seen the presentations online where there's a tank of murky water and you throw some oysters in it and take a picture a few hours later and it's, voila, it's clean. And so, 50 liters a day per oyster, just throw some oysters in there and we'll solve the problem. And the reef kind of followed up on that idea that the filtration was going to be the solution to the water quality problem. Exploring alternatives. Well, the idea of what oysters did, what they could do, it stemmed a few other projects, and this committee was very generous in exploring those things, both financially and in terms of bandwidth. And there was a suggestion that, the biodeposition would lead to enhanced denitrification, and maybe that was the answer. And the town actually, separate from the water quality budget, invested heavily in that idea of enhanced denitrification through biodeposits. But ultimately, by 2018, the town had engaged in developing high-density growing methods for increased aquaculture with the idea that as a result of growing oysters that you could harvest, you would actually have the best nutrient removal that you could document and satisfy the regulators. And out of that came an interesting discovery that not only can you get the nutrients out, but you end up with a product that has turned trash to treasure. And oysters have economic value. So, as people were looking at that unique combination of things and recognizing that filtration, while it happens, doesn't actually solve the nutrient problem in the impaired estuaries, and biodeposits, while it happens, does not solve, or at least not in a measurable way, and perhaps not even in a material way, the nutrient overload problem. Increased aquaculture from the perspective of growing oyster that you remove from the water does in fact accomplish the goals of reducing the nutrient load in these estuaries. So by 2018, the town of Falmouth had managed to, in a number of locations, 3 locations that were highlighted by those 2018s on the previous chart showing in Little Pond, Bournes Pond, and Wacoit Bay, had demonstrated a high-density growing method with extensive measurements, not just of the number of oysters, but their weight, their size, and their nitrogen content, and the area that they were grown in, to document extensively that you could, without working too hard, remove 130 kilograms of nitrogen per acre by growing a product that you could sell. However, it turns out the town is not able to monetize that directly, and so an idea came up, which was, what if we were to allow contractors to come in and grow oysters in these impaired estuaries? They would be providing a service to the town, the nutrients would get removed, and instead of the town having, or anybody for that matter, having to pay for the removal of nutrients, the contractors could actually earn money by doing it. And so we developed a pilot project at a point where it was almost too late to develop pilot projects, and we applied for a special notice of project change when it was a very unpopular thing to do at that stage in the process, suggesting that we were going to do, and it says down here, this Eel River Aquaculture Pilot Project. And the goal of this project was to see, could we get contractors to come in and do this? Would they be willing to cooperate with having a target growth for their area? Would they be willing to report the amount of oysters and the weight of the oysters that they got out? And the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs was very kind and said, we'll let you do this, and it does not require a supplemental EIR. However, in the future, it may require an EIR if this project continues. And so the first thing I'd like to do is provide a little bit of summary about how we ended up where we are. I'm going to talk about a win-win-win-win-win situation. Kind of unusual. We've all heard of the win-win, right? And that's between two parties. It turns out we identified 5 different parties in this process, in this Eel River pilot. And they're listed here as the Eel River project stakeholders, the state and town, or we might say the government or the regulators, the commercial growers, the volunteers who participate in town projects, the harvesters, who are people who are commercially engaged in this, as well as the people who make public use of these facilities. And it turns out, from all estimates that we've been able to come up with, everybody in this list wins. There was a nice video put together by Brian Switzer. It's actually accessible. If anyone wants a link to it, we can provide that. But the exciting thing was that we took some time, and I apologize for the scale of this graphic. I was kind of wishing I had taken time to go back and edit it before I came up here, but nonetheless, the area where these 3 sites are A, B, and C down here in Eel River. But it turns out there's some other resources that are critical to this project being able to work. One is D1 and D2, which are locations where you can launch a boat and park your vehicle while you're working. It's a public resource that's available, and it's within a reasonable distance to the location. There's also over in Falmouth Harbor, it's not visible on this graphic, but in Falmouth Inner Harbor, there's an upweller that's used for growing the very tiny seed when it first comes from the hatchery to the point where it can be actually deployed in these sites in Eel River. And then there's a storage area if you're a fellow doing, or any entity undertaking growing oysters. You have gear that you need to store, and your yard may not be big enough for doing that. And so the town has provided a number of resources to facilitate the contractors doing these things. And what came to light as a process of doing this was that this works really well. It gets the nitrogen out, and it allows people to make money in the process. And so the town took interest in this, not just from a water quality perspective, but also from an economic perspective, from an ecosystems benefit perspective. And they set aside some funds to try to look at what would this project look like if we were to increase it to the largest scale possible in the town of Falmouth. There was a draft plan that was done as a part of the water quality management work back in 2017. It's still available on the town website, and it took a 30,000-foot view of what would it look like if we did the most we could do to increase aquaculture in the town of Falmouth. Not just filtration, not just enhanced denitrification, but actually this idea of putting shellfish in the water that would go from small to big, and when you take them out, you're fully removing the nutrients from the shell and tissue. What's the most we could do? And it came up with some estimates, and there were a lot of people who pushed back on that quite hard. In fact, I remember in some of the early stages of this project, there were people saying you couldn't grow shellfish in Eel River. I mean, in not Eel River. They did say that too. In Little Pond. Wouldn't work. Couldn't grow shellfish in Bourne's Pond. Couldn't grow shellfish in Eel River. Well, it turns out that we actually, if we take some time to check these things out, we can find out what really can be done. And in the process of doing that, the Division of Marine Environmental Services has gone out and done a survey of the town, taking that 30,000-foot view plan and then going out into the areas. And what we're looking at on the right-hand side here, it's kind of hard to see, but this is a Google Earth map, and it has a bunch of regions highlighted in green. They actually went out and surveyed over 207 acres worth of regions that had the potential for, and it says over here, shellfish permit type, oysters, quahogs, or in some cases even scallops to be grown. And a combination of whether it would be commercial, growers or municipal activity that's taking place there. The idea is we do have a resource in the town that could be used for this, and we were talking about a number, how much this would contribute to the overall nutrient reduction in the impaired estuaries. The initial estimate was somewhere around 7%. Will we get there? Well, it depends on a lot of things. We have to try to figure out how to reduce this thing to practice. And there are a lot of different factors, as we were talking about, but these little A's are little sites that represent aquaculture potential that have those green spots, and then I'm just noticing there's an A missing from right in here in Eel River, because in fact there's still space where you could increase aquaculture even in Eel River. So, and some of those are marked right there. So what is happening right now is that the town has contracted our company, separate from the water quality work, to go through an evaluation of the sites and to try to come up with a list of what's doable in those locations. And as we can see, these different locations have an association with watersheds, and there's 4 of them that are highlighted in yellow as ones where it would be really good if we could pull something off in those estuaries. And some of the priority of this is not just driven by whether it would be good for water quality, however. Another aspect of it is, will the people who can grow shellfish be able to grow shellfish there? Can they launch a boat? Can they get however many tons of oysters out of this area without disrupting the neighborhood and doing other things? And so we're taking a look at the resources, we're taking a look at the willingness of people to do things. Right now, for example, these 3 locations in Eel River, we're taking out, the target we set was to get out about 60 kilograms of nitrogen per site. And we believe we've exceeded that. We're actually in the process of reworking our analysis of all that for the whole time range. I was going to put up a graphic, and I figured let's wait until we've got all the numbers. But it's kind of an exciting thing to realize that you can have a small business that's making money taking nitrogen out of the estuary. Is it going to solve the whole problem? No. But it's sort of like, even if we were to sewer the whole system, there's still going to be inputs to the system, and it's almost like using a sponge or a mop to clean up the last little bit that's residual in there, or even maybe getting below the target just a little bit. And I should maybe say that we might want to be careful not to clean up too much, because it takes away the food source for these shellfish. But we still found that these sites are very productive, even in very healthy areas. And so the process of going through and looking at this, I didn't put a graphic up about this either, is not all these areas are open to commercial shellfishing. Some of them are actually closed. Some of them are conditionally open, so you can only harvest at certain times. Others, you could only really necessarily put cohogs out there. How many cohog growers do we have? There's no framework for licensing an aquaculture site to a cohog harvester, right? That's not a thing. But you can dig for cohogs if you have a commercial license. And turns out that the people who are digging for cohogs, if you're serious about it, might actually be taking out more nitrogen than the fellows who are growing in those pilot project areas. One guy who's working it hard. And so how do we attract an industry of people who want to be diggers? It's happened before in this town. People have figured out you can not just make money, you can make good money, and you can have 5 days a week a 360-degree waterfront office,
Eric,
if you want it.
Eric, I have a procedure. We end our meeting at 6:30.
Yes, sir.
Okay? So you've got less than 10 minutes.
I'm going to bring it to a close.
To wrap it up and/or allow questions. But no, the procedural question is we have minutes that we have to cover. So can I get concurrence of this board that we will run over the 6:30, but not more than 15 minutes?
Okay. Yes.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
I'll finish in 3 minutes.
You don't have to finish.
Okay.
I didn't want it to be so compressed. There was no chance to ask you some questions.
Okay. I appreciate that. This is just a list of the top areas right now. The Marine Environmental Services has gone through and prioritized areas based on a bunch of different criteria: the production, the ability to reduce the TMDL over here, or to achieve the TMDL requirement, the size of the area, the accessibility of the area, the multi-species. All these different criteria were put into a first cut spreadsheet, and the top areas, it turns out, are all in Great Pond. And that doesn't mean we're not going to look at other areas, but it was just interesting to see that the process of initial evaluation says, well, look, here's a place where we should really focus our attention. And so what's happening right now is, as we go through and look about what's ahead, one of the things is to develop a draft description of the up to 70 new sites. That was what the contract was for in terms of the scale of it all. That's not all commercial sites, it's not all municipal sites, just 60 or 70 different sites up to that number that we would consider making our full-scale plan for this is where we're going to increase aquaculture in the town of Falmouth. And so the idea is, let's take a look at what that would look like, where the boat landings are, what are we harvesting, oysters or quahogs, and then let's get stakeholder input from the community, because not every community wants to see this. A lot of communities we found really do want to see it. We were somewhat surprised by that, but let's talk to the growers, see if they're interested in doing this kind of shell fishing. Let's talk to the public, see if they're interested in having it be a part of where they interact with the waterfront. And not just the legal abutters, but also the people who can see it, or the people who are going to notice it because they're out in their boats. We've discovered it's very important to take into account, even though it's not legally required, it does have a footprint on the future of the whole activity. So we want to make sure we're talking to those people early on, and the government. The town of Falmouth, to see their level of interest. The town has been very supportive, even outside of this committee, especially outside of this committee. And then also the regulators, and I'm talking about the state government, and then even the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers, and what they have to say about this. So we're going to look for that input, and then ultimately consult. We want to do a little bit of, or actually a lot bit of preparation before we go and consult with the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and hopefully convince them that we've actually pretty carefully looked at what we're thinking about doing, so that all they'll say is, all you have to do is publish a notice, kind of like they did with the NPC, you're good to go. Once we have some guidance from them about how to proceed, we will go ahead with the permit process, and then we're going to move on to the engineering of the practical aspects of the implementation, figure out what needs to be in the contracts to solicit growers to come in, what the town resources are that will be made available to these growers, and then what we're going to do in terms of monitoring to verify that we're actually getting the nutrients out that we said we would. So I'll end it with that. That's kind of, we're early on in the process. I would say we're right up here at the top, and over the course of the next 2+ years, we're hoping to get to the bottom of this.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Tom first, because Tom has been our liaison with the shellfishing.
Well, a couple things to point out. Town meeting did set aside $450,000 this year, I believe in the April town meeting, to support this work. So it's been pretty thoroughly endorsed across Falmouth, which is a pretty good deal. But one real minor point, Eric, if you could go back to one of the slides that had all those circled A's on it. Yeah, you don't have anything in Great Pond.
Yeah, I did. I think I said Eel River, but that was a mistake.
Yeah, I know, you said Eel River, and that's what threw me off, because I'm looking at, yeah. So, yeah, there should be a big A right in the middle of those 4 A's that are up
It
there
might be
now.
hiding in the back of the graphic.
Yeah, no, great. No, good presentation. You really hit on all cylinders. The only thing I would add as a little aside here, and it goes back to the quahog issue, a harvestable quahog has as much nitrogen in it as a harvestable oyster, but it takes about 3 years for the quahog to do that, and the oysters do it in less than 2 years. So you get a little faster results. And the other thing is the 3 growers together pay about $19,000 each in rent with the present contract we have in town. And all of that money goes to buying seed quahogs every year. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of seed quahogs are put out in both public and family and commercial areas each year in Falmouth to keep that part of it going too. And that's the part that we don't have a handle on, as you mentioned already, Eric. We haven't quantified. We do know for sure with the aquaculture things that in about 8 months, because they're not in there year round, the oysters are taking out over 100 kilograms per acre. And if I did a paper midsummer on that in here. So it's been an amazing success story, and I think there's going to be some speed bumps, but it's moving forward.
John?
Yeah, no, I think it's great to have another tool in the arsenal that we have to choose from. So, yeah, really great study.
John?
Well said.
Steve?
Great presentation. Go ahead. You mentioned 7%. Is that an average or a peak or a wished for goal?
So that was a sort of top-level estimate of what we could do that was intended to be somewhat conservative, but it is watershed specific. So,
right.
For example, in Rand's Canal, probably not going to be 7%.
I would love to see a list of all the estuaries with that percent for each of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a graphic that was old because it was prior to reviewing these 70 sites. So what we need to do right now, and we're in the process of doing, is what are the real sites, not the theoretical sites.
And I don't want to wait a long time for it. I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
I'd love to see an estimate now with a disclaimer that this blah, 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 blah has to be done to make this right.
Yep.
And then we do blah, 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 and you make a better version later on.
Yeah.
But at least there's a working version early on.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, the time frame for that's probably the next 6 to 8 weeks. And we're in the process of wanting to, first of all, check in with the committee here to say, this is starting to be a public discussion now. We're going to the Shellfish Advisory Committee meetings, hammering out, these are the areas. Because if they sit there and they say, well, I would never dig there. Okay. We need to know things like that. And then we'll be able to come up with that list that's tied to.
Right, because you have to say, you can't go around saying, and see, it removes the nitrogen.
Yeah.
It doesn't remove the nitrogen. It removes 7% of it.
Yes.
Which is good. I mean, it's doing it at a profit.
Yeah, yeah. So, again, I would say in some, like Wacoit Bay, where you've got a huge load, right? The actual number of kilograms is going to be high. It is high. But the percentage can be really low. So.
Ed?
Good stuff. Look forward to hearing more as it progresses and periodic updates.
You're up, Ken.
So I actually mentioned this to Eric a couple days ago. I said, Little Pond, they didn't put the cages out this year. They used to be, well, when I first went to Little Pond, they were growing them up by the Sentinel Station. And they had a little float out there, and everything was good until one period of time when I guess there was a hypoxic anoxic event, and all of the oysters died. Or you got them moved, I guess.
Actually, I personally moved them from the north to the south.
Right. But there was the threat of mortality. So, and now more recently, they've been growing them near the entrance to the pond, which is more well flushed. But as the water quality in the pond is improving, thanks to the sewering, I think more area, potential area for growing these is opening up. So that's kind of another way that we can leverage, improvements due to either sewering or IAs or whatever, with expansion of potential sites where oysters could be grown.
I should say there are scallops there this year in that south section.
I'm going to turn to the audience. We have with us the original proponent of aquaculture for the town. You care to join the conversation?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think this program dates back to like 2010 or something like that when we first started doing it. But anyway, thank you. That was a pretty good presentation, I thought, and they didn't die, Ken. They didn't die. None of them died, actually, because of their effort. But oysters have the capacity under difficult water quality conditions to literally clam up for like 48 hours. And what happened in this case was that an alarm was sounded. These guys jumped in, and within 48 hours, the water was okay. And the third of the oysters they did move in the problem area were fine. So it was yeah, so anyway, but that's just the point. But this is great. I'm glad that it's continuing. Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience that cares to comment about aquaculture? Okay. Thank you so much for updating us, and we wish you continued success.
Eric, that was great.
All right. In the interest of time, even though we did get a 15-minute extension, unless there's a pressing report from a member of the committee or staff.
I do want to mention the Marion Institute thing that I circulated to the committee. The first week in October, I think it's the 3rd, yes, Friday, October 3rd, the Marion Institute is hosting a food summit. And one of the interesting points that they're really emphasizing is there's a move afoot to develop a coastal waters wastewater financing committee within the Great and General Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is looking specifically, the goal would be to identify revenue sources to fund essential wastewater infrastructure improvements. I'm out of town that week, so I can't attend, but if anyone else from the committee that could attend, and obviously I hope there'll be some reports coming out of it, but that's the main thing I wanted to mention.
Tom, you did send something around about that?
I forwarded it.
Yeah, Kristen did for me.
Yeah, I saw it.
If not, you can have my printout here, or go to their website. It's, they're doing other things too, but that was one of the more interesting features of it. I thought was a bit of a surprise. One of the other foci is this horrible problem we've had for the last couple of years in here in Massachusetts of combined sewer overflows, dumping
Yeah, it's a big item.
enormous amounts of
Big item out
wastewater.
of New Bedford, yeah.
So, and that's all I have to say.
All right. We have minutes of prior meetings.
I move that they be accepted as is.
Second.
Here, let's go like this. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes? Okay, no comments. Go ahead, make your motion now.
I move that they be accepted as is.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, there's one last motion, not open to debate.
Mr. Chairman, the minutes for our last meeting, which was a joint, we all attended, or most of us attended, the Board of Health. Public hearing on their new IA regulation. Just point of information for folks that aren't aware, on the 29th, which is a Monday night, they will have their regularly scheduled timeframe meeting downstairs at the Civil Defense Conference Room, and that will be the final public hearing on that IA regulation, which I think is a major milestone in all of our efforts to clean up the estuary. So,
All right.
move for adjournment.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.